The billionaire was about to sign his bankruptcy at 8 a.m. until his maid noticed the mistake. The morning sun crept over the glass towers of Caldwell Enterprises, but inside the penthouse office on the 42nd floor, the air was heavy with defeat. For Mr. Adrian Hale, once one of the most powerful billionaires in the city, today marked the end. His empire, built over 2 decades of sweat, vision, and sacrifice, had crumbled under the weight of betrayal. Investors had fled, partners turned their backs, and even his trusted CFO had disappeared, leaving a trail of missing funds and unpaid debts. At 8 a.m., Adrian was scheduled to meet his legal team to sign the final papers officially declaring bankruptcy. For the first time in years, he didn't wear his signature tailored suit. He sat at the dining table in silence, surrounded by stacks of documents. His coffee sat untouched. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the final contract, a man too tired to fight anymore. Just then, Grace, his live-in maid, quietly entered the room. She was a gentle woman in her early 30s, working multiple jobs to care for her younger siblings. Grace had only been with him for 6 months, yet she had noticed something no one else dared to see. The man behind the wealth was crumbling in silence. "Sir," she said softly, placing his breakfast beside him, "you haven't eaten in 2 days. Please." Adrian gave her a weak smile. "Thank you, Grace, but after today, there won't be much of this house left anyway." Her heart ached hearing that. She hesitated, her eyes catching the open folder on the table, pages of legal text and numbers neatly bound together. She noticed one detail that made her frown. Grace had worked as an assistant once, long before tragedy forced her into domestic work. She couldn't help but glance again. "Sir," she said carefully, "may I ask, is this the final draft?" Adrian looked up, surprised. "Yes. Why?" She pointed at the line buried deep within the text, a small clause written in fine print. "All intellectual and real estate assets, including the Hale Foundation, are to be transferred to Mark Vance upon signature." Grace blinked. "Sir, this clause gives ownership of your charity and properties to Mr. Vance. Isn't he the one who—" Adrian's eyes widened. He snatched the document from her hand and read it again. His pulse quickened. She was right. His ex-CFO had planted a transfer clause in the bankruptcy agreement. Signing it would have handed over everything, even his foundation that cared for underprivileged children, directly to the man who betrayed him. He pushed his chair back, adrenaline replacing despair. "Grace, you just saved my company. If you've ever felt like giving up when everything seemed lost, or if someone unexpected has ever saved you from a terrible mistake, drop a comment sharing where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button." This story reminds us that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who see what others miss, and that hope can come from the most unexpected places. Now let's see how this maid's sharp eyes changed everything. Adrian Hale stared at the document in his hands, his heart pounding as the implications of what Grace had discovered sank in. For the past 3 weeks, he'd been operating in a fog of exhaustion and defeat, barely sleeping, barely eating, just mechanically moving through the steps of dismantling everything he'd built. He'd trusted his legal team to handle the bankruptcy proceedings properly, had assumed that the documents they'd prepared were straightforward declarations of insolvency. But Grace had just revealed that buried in the legal language was a clause that would have given Mark Vance, his former CFO and the architect of his company's collapse, complete ownership of not just his remaining business assets, but his personal properties and even the Hale Foundation, the charitable organization Adrian had established 15 years ago to provide educational opportunities for underprivileged children. "How did I miss this?" Adrian whispered, scanning the document more carefully now. The clause was expertly hidden, written in dense legal terminology that made it sound like standard creditor protection language. But Grace was right, it explicitly transferred ownership rather than liquidation rights. "Sir, I only noticed because I used to work as a legal assistant," Grace said quietly, standing nervously a few feet away. "Before my parents died and I had to take care of my siblings, I recognized transfer language versus bankruptcy language. This document isn't declaring bankruptcy, it's signing over your entire estate to Mr. Vance." Adrian looked at Grace, really looked at her for perhaps the first time since she'd started working for him 6 months ago. She was slight and unassuming, always moving efficiently through his penthouse, performing her duties with quiet competence. He'd hired her through an agency after his previous housekeeper retired, had barely conducted an interview, just needed someone reliable to maintain the household while his world fell apart. Now this woman he'd barely noticed had just prevented him from making a catastrophic mistake that would have cost him literally everything. "Grace, sit down, please," Adrian said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Tell me more about your background. You worked as a legal assistant?" Grace hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the invitation to sit in his presence rather than serving him. But Adrian's expression was insistent, so she slowly lowered herself into the chair. "Yes, sir. I worked for Morrison & Associates for 5 years, specializing in contract law and corporate documents. I was good at my job, sir. Really good. I was on track for paralegal certification." "What happened?" Adrian asked gently. "My parents were killed in a car accident 3 years ago," Grace said, her voice steady but sad. "They didn't have life insurance or savings. I have 3 younger siblings. David is 17. Twins Lily and Luke are 14. I became their legal guardian. Legal assistant salary wasn't enough to support 4 people, especially with the twins' medical expenses. Lily has type 1 diabetes. So I took whatever work paid the most, which meant leaving my legal career for domestic work and night shifts at a hospital." Adrian felt shame wash over him. This woman had been cleaning his home, preparing his meals, organizing his life for 6 months, and he'd never bothered to learn anything about her beyond confirming she had good references. He'd treated her as invisible, just another service provider in the background of his privileged existence. "Grace, I'm so sorry," Adrian said, "for your loss, for the circumstances you've been dealing with, and frankly for never bothering to see you as a whole person rather than just my employee." "You've been dealing with your own crisis, sir," Grace said diplomatically. "I didn't expect you to notice me." That's no excuse for basic human decency," Adrian said. "You noticed me enough to save me from financial destruction. The least I could have done was notice you enough to learn your story." He looked at the document again, anger starting to replace the shock. "Grace, I need to call my lawyers immediately. Can you help me identify all the problematic language in this contract? Your expertise could be crucial in understanding exactly what Vance was trying to do." For the next 2 hours, Adrian and Grace went through the bankruptcy documents line by line. Grace's legal training allowed her to identify multiple problematic clauses that Adrian's own lawyers had either missed or deliberately included. The more they found, the angrier Adrian became, not just at Vance, but at his legal team who'd apparently been complicit in this attempted theft. "Sir, I don't think your lawyers missed these clauses," Grace said carefully as they documented a 6th instance of suspicious language. "I think they were paid to include them." This level of consistent deception across multiple documents suggests coordination rather than oversight. Adrian pulled out his phone and called his head attorney, Richard Caldwell, who'd been managing the bankruptcy proceedings. "Richard, it's Adrian. Don't come to the office this morning. In fact, consider our professional relationship terminated effective immediately." "Adrian, what are you talking about?" Richard's voice came through confused and slightly irritated. "We're supposed to finalize the bankruptcy filing in," he checked his watch, 30 minutes. "What's going on?" "What's going on is that the documents you prepared don't declare bankruptcy. They sign my entire estate over to Mark Vance. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or were you counting on me being too defeated to read carefully before signing?" Silence on the other end of the line. "Then, Adrian, I don't know what you think you found, but those are standard bankruptcy proceedings. If you're having second thoughts about filing, we can discuss." "Save it, Richard. I'm reporting you to the State Bar Association for ethics violations, and I'm forwarding all these documents to the district attorney's office because this looks like fraud to me. Don't contact me again." Adrian hung up before Richard could respond, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Grace watched him with concern. "Sir, are you all right?" "No," Adrian admitted. "I'm furious. I trusted these people. Richard has been my attorney for 15 years. I thought he was helping me salvage what I could from this disaster. Instead, he was working with Vance to steal everything. He looked at Grace with something like wonder. You saved me from signing away my life's work. How can I possibly thank you? You don't need to thank me, sir, Grace said. I just did what anyone should do, pointed out something that wasn't right. Grace, most people in your position wouldn't have said anything. They'd have been too afraid of overstepping, too conditioned to not question their employers, too focused on just keeping their job. You risked your position to help me. That takes courage. Grace ducked her head, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. What will you do now, sir, if you can't trust your legal team and the bankruptcy is fraudulent? Now I fight back, Adrian said, feeling energy returning for the first time in weeks. If Vance embedded these clauses in the bankruptcy documents, it means he's been orchestrating this collapse from the beginning, which means there's evidence of his fraud somewhere. I just need to find it. He stood, pacing now, his mind working through possibilities. Grace, I need your help. If you're willing to work with me, not as my maid, but as my assistant, investigating this fraud, I'll triple your current salary and ensure your siblings are taken care of. Your legal skills are exactly what I need right now. Grace's eyes widened. Sir, I'm not qualified I don't have my paralegal certification. I haven't worked in legal for 3 years. You just identified sophisticated fraud that multiple licensed attorneys either missed or deliberately ignored. Adrian interrupted. You're more qualified than most of the people I've been paying premium rates to advise me. Grace, I need someone I can trust, someone who actually sees details others miss, someone whose loyalty I can count on. Will you help me? Grace looked at the document spread across the table, then at Adrian's desperate but determined face. Yes, sir, I'll help you. Over the following days, Adrian and Grace worked around the clock, investigating the collapse of Caldwell Enterprises. Adrian contacted forensic accountants he trusted from other companies, brought in cybersecurity experts to examine his company's digital records, and hired a new legal team specifically experienced in corporate fraud cases. Grace proved invaluable in this process. Her legal training allowed her to navigate complex documents quickly, identifying patterns and connections that others missed. She'd spend hours poring over financial records, creating spreadsheets, tracking suspicious transactions, building timelines of events leading to the company's collapse. Sir, look at this, Grace said 3 days into their investigation, pointing at her laptop screen. Adrian moved to look over her shoulder. These wire transfers from Caldwell accounts to offshore holdings, they all happened on dates when you were traveling for business. And they were all approved by Mark Vance using electronic signatures that appear to be yours. He forged my signature? Adrian asked, leaning closer to examine the records. It looks that way. The forensic analysts can confirm, but the signature patterns don't quite match your actual signature. Close enough to pass casual inspection, but with subtle differences that suggest forgery. Adrian felt rage building again. Mark Vance had been his CFO for 8 years, someone Adrian had trusted completely with the company's finances. They'd never been close friends. Vance was too cold and calculating for genuine friendship, but Adrian had respected his financial acumen and believed him loyal to the company. Now it appeared Vance had been systematically embezzling funds for years, had forged Adrian's signature to authorize fraudulent transfers, and had finally orchestrated the company's collapse to cover his tracks, while positioning himself to steal Adrian's remaining assets through the fraudulent bankruptcy. We need to bring this to law enforcement, Adrian said. Grace, can you compile everything we've found into a coherent report that prosecutors can use? Yes, sir. I'll have it ready by tomorrow morning. As Grace worked on compiling the evidence, Adrian found himself watching her with growing admiration. She worked with focused intensity, her fingers flying over the keyboard, occasionally pausing to verify a fact or cross-reference documents. She'd transformed from invisible servant to invaluable partner in just days, and Adrian couldn't understand how he'd failed to see her capabilities earlier. Around midnight, Adrian insisted Grace take a break. You've been working for 16 hours straight. You need to eat, to sleep. So have you, sir, Grace pointed out. I can work as long as you can. Grace, you don't have to call me sir anymore. We're working as partners on this, not employer and employee. Please, just call me Adrian. Grace looked uncomfortable with this. That doesn't feel appropriate, sir. You're still my employer. Technically, but we're also collaborating as equals on this investigation. And honestly, I'd like to think we're becoming friends. Grace, you've seen me at my absolute lowest, defeated, nearly broken, about to sign away everything. There's not much formality left to maintain. Friends, Grace repeated, testing the word. I've never been friends with someone who pays my salary before. Well, there's a first time for everything, Adrian said, smiling slightly. Now please, take a break. Eat something, get some rest. The evidence will still be here tomorrow. The next morning, Adrian and Grace met with District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, presenting their compiled evidence of Mark Vance's fraud. The DA listened carefully, reviewing documents, asking clarifying questions about the timeline and financial transactions. This is substantial, DA Walsh said after an hour of review. Mr. Hale, with this evidence, we have grounds to arrest Mr. Vance and investigate his accomplices, including your former legal team. I'll need a few days to coordinate with Financial Crimes Division, but I think we can move forward with charges. What about recovering the stolen funds? Adrian asked. My company's bankruptcy was based on these fraudulent transactions. If we can prove the insolvency was manufactured, then we can potentially unwind the bankruptcy and restore your company's solvency, DA Walsh confirmed. It won't be quick or easy, but yes, you have a strong case for recovery. Mr. Hale, whoever helped you identify this fraud saved your entire empire. Adrian looked at Grace, who was sitting quietly beside him. Grace did. My former maid turned assistant caught the fraudulent bankruptcy clause and helped uncover the entire scheme. DA Walsh extended her hand to Grace. Miss Martinez. Grace Martinez. Miss Martinez, excellent work. Have you considered becoming a paralegal? You have obvious talent for legal investigation. I was working toward that before family circumstances changed my career path, Grace said. Maybe someday I'll finish that certification. I hope you do, DA Walsh said sincerely. We need people with your attention to detail in this field. As they left the DA's office, Adrian felt hope for the first time in months. The investigation was underway. Vance would be arrested. The stolen funds could potentially be recovered. His empire wasn't lost, it could be rebuilt. Grace, I owe you everything, Adrian said as they walked to his car. Without you, I'd have signed those papers this morning. I'd have lost my company, my foundation, my home, everything to the man who destroyed it all. You saved me. You would have figured it out eventually, Grace said. Maybe after signing, but before Vance could take possession, you would have realized something was wrong. Maybe, Adrian conceded. But maybe not. I was defeated, Grace. I wasn't thinking clearly. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted and stopped trusting my own instincts. You saw what I couldn't see because I'd stopped looking. That matters more than you know. Over the following weeks, the investigation proceeded rapidly. Mark Vance was arrested, trying to board an international flight with fraudulently obtained documents. Adrian's former legal team faced disciplinary proceedings and potential criminal charges. The forensic accountants traced millions in stolen funds through offshore accounts and shell corporations. Throughout this process, Grace remained Adrian's constant partner. She'd moved from maid to assistant to something approaching trusted advisor, helping Adrian navigate not just the legal proceedings, but the emotional aftermath of such profound betrayal. I don't understand how I missed the signs, Adrian said one evening as they worked late in his study. Vance must have been planning this for years. How did I not notice? Because you trusted him, Grace said simply. Trust makes us vulnerable, but it's also necessary for building anything meaningful. You can't run a company by suspecting everyone constantly. Vance exploited your trust, but that's his failing, not yours. You're very wise for someone so young, Adrian observed. Grace smiled slightly. Becoming guardian to 3 teenagers after your parents die makes you grow up fast. You learn to see people clearly when you're suddenly responsible for others' well-being. Adrian had met Grace's siblings by now, David, responsible and mature beyond his 17 years. Lily and Luke, vibrant 14-year-olds managing their health challenges with impressive resilience. They lived in a modest apartment across town, and Adrian had been quietly ensuring their rent was covered and Lily's medical expenses were handled through his company's emergency assistance fund. "How are your siblings doing?" Adrian asked. David mentioned he was applying to colleges. "He got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship," Grace said proudly. "It's been his dream school since he was young. I'm trying to figure out how to cover the remaining costs without him having to work full-time while studying." "Grace, let me help with that," Adrian offered. "Consider it partial repayment for saving my entire empire." "You've already helped so much, Adrian," Grace protested, using his first name now after weeks of him insisting. "The salary increase, covering Lily's medical expenses, flexible hours so I can attend Luke's school events, you've done more than enough." It's not nearly enough," Adrian said firmly. "Grace, you changed the trajectory of my life. If there's anything I can do to improve yours and your siblings' lives, please let me help." Before Grace could respond, Adrian's phone rang. "The DA's office," Adrian answered on speaker. "Mr. Hale, we've successfully traced and frozen $47 million in offshore accounts tied to Mark Vance's embezzlement scheme. We're still tracking additional funds, but this recovery alone should significantly improve your company's financial position." "That's excellent news," Adrian said, relief flooding through him. "What happens next?" "Vance is facing multiple charges: fraud, embezzlement, forgery, conspiracy. Your legal team faces similar charges. With the evidence Ms. Martinez helped compile, we're confident in securing convictions. The frozen funds will be returned to Caldwell Enterprises, pending final court proceedings, but you can begin planning your company's recovery." After the call ended, Adrian sat back in his chair, processing the information. His company could be saved. The empire he'd built over 20 years, that he'd thought was lost forever, could actually be rebuilt, because Grace had noticed one suspicious clause in a bankruptcy document and had the courage to speak up. "We did it," Adrian said quietly. "Grace, we actually did it." "You did it," Grace corrected. "I just helped you see what was there." "You did far more than that," Adrian insisted. "Grace, I want to offer you a permanent position as my executive assistant. Not temporary help during the crisis, but a real career position with benefits, professional development opportunities, the chance to finish your paralegal certification while working. Will you consider it?" Grace looked at him for a long moment. "Adrian, I appreciate everything you've done for me and my family, but I need to ask, is this offer because you genuinely think I'm qualified, or because you feel obligated to repay me?" "Both," Adrian admitted honestly. "Yes, I feel incredibly grateful for what you did. But Grace, you've proven yourself invaluable over these past weeks. Your legal skills, your attention to detail, your ability to see patterns others miss, these are genuine professional assets. I'm offering this position because I think you'd excel at it, and because I want someone I can trust absolutely in that role. The gratitude is real, but so is the professional respect." "Then yes," Grace said, smiling. "I'll accept the position. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Grace, for everything." As Adrian drove Grace home that evening, something he'd started doing regularly rather than making her take public transit after long work days, he found himself reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed in such a short time. A month ago, he'd been defeated and alone, about to sign away everything he'd built. Today, he was rebuilding his empire, pursuing justice against those who'd betrayed him, and developing a genuine friendship with someone he'd initially overlooked entirely. Sometimes salvation came from unexpected sources. Sometimes the people we dismissed as unimportant turned out to be exactly who we needed. And sometimes nearly losing everything taught you what actually mattered, not the empire itself, but the character and integrity and human connections that made that empire worth building in the first place. Adrian had been so focused on wealth and success that he'd stopped seeing people clearly. Grace had reminded him that the most valuable assets weren't financial, they were human. Loyalty, integrity, courage, compassion. These were what rebuilt empires after betrayal destroyed them. And they were what transformed a relationship between Billionaire and Maid into something far more meaningful. Genuine partnership, mutual respect, and the beginning of what Adrian suspected might eventually become something more than just professional collaboration or even friendship. But for now, recovery was enough. Rebuilding was enough. Having someone beside him who saw him clearly and chose to stay, that was more than enough. That was everything. 6 months after Grace had saved Adrian from signing the fraudulent bankruptcy documents, Caldwell Enterprises was experiencing a remarkable recovery. The $47 million in recovered funds had stabilized the company's finances, allowing Adrian to restructure debt, retain key employees, and begin rebuilding the business empire that had nearly been destroyed by Mark Vance's systematic fraud. Adrian sat in his newly renovated office he'd moved back into Caldwell Tower after months of working from home during the crisis, reviewing quarterly reports with genuine satisfaction. Revenue was up 15% from the previous quarter. Several major clients who'd fled during the scandal had returned, and 2 promising acquisition opportunities were on the table. But what pleased Adrian most wasn't the financial recovery. It was the transformation in how he ran his business. The betrayal by Vance and his legal team had taught Adrian that surrounding yourself with competent but disconnected professionals created blind spots where fraud could flourish. Now he prioritized building relationships with employees at all levels, created transparent reporting systems, and insisted on personal involvement in major decisions rather than delegating everything to trusted lieutenants. Grace was integral to this transformation. As Adrian's executive assistant, she'd proven invaluable not just for her legal skills and attention to detail, but for her perspective as someone who'd worked both white-collar professional jobs and service positions. She understood corporate dynamics from multiple angles, could identify when processes were failing the people implementing them, and had an intuitive sense for when something didn't quite add up. "Adrian, you have a call with the Forbes reporter in 10 minutes, Grace said, entering his office with her usual quiet efficiency. "And your 2 with the merger team has been moved to 2:30. Their flight was delayed." "Thank you, Grace." Adrian looked up from his reports. "How did your brother's college orientation go? David started at State this week, right?" Grace's face lit up with pride. "It went wonderfully. He's in the honors program, sharing a dorm with another scholarship student, already talking about joining the debate team." "I can't thank you enough for the support you've provided, Adrian. Without the scholarship fund contribution, he'd be working full-time and taking classes part-time instead of having a real college experience." "Classes. David earned that support with his own merit," Adrian said. "I just made sure finances weren't the barrier preventing him from pursuing his potential." He paused, then added, "Grace, I've been thinking about something. You mentioned wanting to finish your paralegal certification. What if we structured your position to allow you to take classes? You could work reduced hours or adjust your schedule to accommodate coursework." "That's generous, but I'm needed here full-time," Grace protested, "especially with the expansion plans you're developing." "We can hire additional support staff," Adrian countered. "Grace, you saved my company by using legal skills you've barely utilized in 3 years. Imagine what you could accomplish with formal credentials and continuing education. I want to invest in your professional development the way you invested in saving my business. If you've ever had someone believe in your potential more than you believed in yourself, if you've ever been given an opportunity that changed your trajectory, drop a comment and subscribe." This story shows us that the people who lift us up often become the most important relationships in our lives, that gratitude can transform into genuine partnership, and that seeing someone's value creates bonds stronger than any professional arrangement. Grace looked conflicted. "I appreciate this, truly. But Adrian, I worry about. I don't want you to feel obligated to keep supporting me and my family beyond what's appropriate for an employer-employee relationship. You've already done so much." "I don't want you to feel obligated to keep supporting me." "Grace, this stopped being a simple employer-employee relationship months ago," Adrian said gently. "You're not just my assistant. You're someone whose judgment I trust completely, whose perspective I value, whose friendship I treasure. Supporting your professional development benefits both of us. You get to complete goals you'd put on hold, and I get an even more skilled partner helping run my company." "Partner," Grace repeated, testing the word. "That's a significant promotion from maid." "You were never just a maid," Adrian said. "I failed to see that initially, which was my mistake. But Grace, you've been essential to rebuilding this company. You deserve recognition and investment proportional to your contribution." "Yes." Over the following weeks, Adrian and Grace developed a plan for her to complete her paralegal certification while continuing as his executive assistant. They hired an additional administrative coordinator to handle routine tasks, adjusted Grace's schedule to accommodate evening classes, and arranged for the company to cover tuition and materials. But as they worked closely together implementing these changes, Adrian found himself increasingly aware that his feelings for Grace had evolved beyond professional respect or even friendship. He looked forward to seeing her each morning, valued her perspective not just on business matters but on life generally, felt more centered and focused when she was nearby. He tried to dismiss these feelings as inappropriate, given their professional relationship and the power dynamics involved. Grace depended on him for employment, for her family's financial security, for the opportunities she'd been given. Pursuing anything romantic would be exploiting that dependency, crossing ethical lines that shouldn't be crossed. Yet the feelings persisted and grew stronger despite his attempts to suppress them. Grace, for her part, was experiencing similar confusion. Working closely with Adrian had revealed qualities she'd never seen in other men she'd known. His genuine humility despite his wealth, his willingness to admit mistakes and learn from them, his commitment to using his resources to create opportunities for others, the way he'd embraced her siblings, ensuring David could attend college and Lily had the best diabetes care available. But Grace reminded herself constantly that Adrian was her employer, that any relationship beyond professional would be complicated by power dynamics and potential accusations of impropriety, that he'd shown her kindness out of gratitude for saving his company, not romantic interest. That imagining anything more was foolish, given their vastly different social and economic positions. The tension between them grew over months, unspoken but increasingly obvious to anyone observing their interactions. The way Adrian's expression softened when Grace entered a room, how Grace's hands would linger slightly longer than necessary when passing him documents, the comfortable silences they'd fall into while working late, both aware of but not acknowledging the chemistry building between them. It was Grace's brother David who finally addressed it directly. He'd come to Adrian's office one Saturday to thank him personally for the scholarship support. After their conversation, as Grace was showing David out, he'd said quietly, "You know he's in love with you, right?" Grace had frozen. "David, that's ridiculous. Adrian is my employer. He's grateful for what I did. But, Grace, I've watched you two together. The way he looks at you isn't gratitude. It's love, and the way you look at him is the same. I'm not saying you have to do anything about it. The situation is complicated, but don't pretend you don't see it." That evening, Grace found herself unable to stop thinking about David's observation. Was it true? Did Adrian have feelings for her beyond professional appreciation? And if he did, what did that mean for their working relationship, for the opportunities he'd provided her family, for the genuine friendship they'd developed? She decided she needed to address it directly. The next Monday, after their final meeting of the day, Grace asked, "Adrian, can we talk about something personal?" Adrian looked up from his laptop, surprised. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "My brother said something that's been bothering me," Grace began carefully. "He suggested that your feelings toward me might be more than just professional or friendly, and I need to know if that's true, because if it is, we need to discuss how to navigate that appropriately." Adrian went very still. Then he closed his laptop, giving Grace his full attention. "What did David say specifically?" "That you're in love with me," Grace said, her voice steady despite the awkwardness of the conversation. "That the way you look at me reveals feelings you haven't expressed. Adrian, I need you to be honest. Is that true?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how to respond. Finally, he said, "Yes, it's true. Grace, I've been trying to suppress these feelings for months because they're inappropriate given our professional relationship and the power dynamics involved. But since you've asked directly, I won't lie. I've fallen in love with you not because you saved my company, though I'll always be grateful for that, but because of who you are. Your integrity, your intelligence, your compassion, your strength. You're extraordinary, Grace. And yes, I'm in love with you. Grace felt her breath catch. Adrian, I don't know what to say. I've had similar feelings, but I convinced myself they were just gratitude or admiration or... Are they? Adrian interrupted gently. Just gratitude or admiration? No, Grace admitted. They're more than that. I've fallen for you too, Adrian. But I don't know how to navigate this ethically. You're my employer. You provide for my family. The power dynamics are massively unbalanced. If we pursued anything romantic and it ended badly, I could lose everything: my job, the support you've given my siblings, the professional opportunities I've been rebuilding. I know, Adrian said. That's why I've been trying to suppress these feelings rather than expressing them. Grace, I would never want you to feel pressured or compromised. Your job security, your siblings' support, your professional development, none of that is conditional on reciprocating my feelings. If you don't feel the same way, or if you feel anything romantic would be too complicated, I'll respect that completely and will maintain our professional relationship. But I do feel the same way, Grace said. That's the problem. Adrian, I'm in love with you too. But how do we pursue that without it becoming unethical or damaging our professional relationship or creating situations where I can't be objective about business decisions? Adrian considered this carefully. What if we set clear boundaries? Separate our romantic relationship from our professional one as much as possible. Continue reporting structures where you have HR oversight beyond just me, so there's accountability. Be transparent with the company about our relationship, so there's no appearance of impropriety. And most importantly, ensure your job security and compensation are formalized in a contract that protects you regardless of our personal relationship status. You've thought about this, Grace observed. I've thought about little else for weeks, Adrian admitted. Grace, I don't want to pressure you, but if you're willing to try navigating this carefully and ethically, I'd like to explore whether what we feel for each other could become something real. Not employer and employee dating, but two people who've been through extraordinary circumstances together and developed genuine feelings, building a relationship on equal footing. Equal footing is difficult when one person is a billionaire and the other was a maid 6 months ago, Grace pointed out. You're not a maid anymore, Adrian said. You're an executive assistant with paralegal training, working toward professional certification, with skills and perspective I rely on daily. Grace, I understand the economic disparity between us is significant, but in terms of the things that actually matter, character, integrity, intelligence, values, we're absolutely equals. That's the foundation I want to build on. Grace looked at Adrian for a long moment, weighing all the complications against the genuine feelings she'd been fighting for months. Okay, she finally said. Let's try. Carefully, with clear boundaries, with HR oversight and formal protections. But Adrian, if at any point this becomes unethical or compromises my professional judgment or makes others uncomfortable, we need to be willing to step back. Agreed, Adrian said. He stood, moving around his desk to where Grace sat. May I kiss you? Grace smiled at the formal request. Yes, you may. Their first kiss was tentative and sweet, both of them aware of the significance of this moment, crossing from professional to personal, acknowledging feelings that had been building for months, beginning something that could either be wonderful or disastrously complicated. When they pulled apart, Adrian said quietly, I've wanted to do that for 3 months. Me too, Grace admitted, though I kept telling myself I was crazy for even thinking about it. They informed HR the next day, formally disclosing their relationship and requesting guidance on appropriate boundaries and oversight. They drafted an employment contract for Grace that guaranteed her position, salary, and benefits, independent of their personal relationship status. They established clear rules about keeping professional and personal matters separate, about ensuring Grace had autonomy in her work decisions, about preventing any appearance of favoritism. Their relationship developed slowly and carefully over the following months. Adrian was conscientious about not leveraging his position or wealth to pressure Grace, about ensuring she always had the freedom to set boundaries without professional consequences. Grace was equally careful about maintaining her professional integrity, about making decisions based on what was best for the company rather than their relationship. David and the twins welcomed Adrian into their family with warmth that touched him deeply. Isabella, Grace's elderly aunt who'd helped care for the siblings, was more skeptical initially but gradually accepted Adrian as she saw how he treated Grace with genuine respect and care. 1 year after Grace had noticed the fraudulent clause in Adrian's bankruptcy documents, they celebrated the anniversary with dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first official date. "A year ago, I was 8 hours away from losing everything," Adrian reflected. "My company, my foundation, my home, all of it would have been signed over to the man who destroyed me. And you saved me by noticing one suspicious clause buried in legal documents. A year ago, I was working as a maid while my legal skills went unused, struggling to support my siblings on service wages, convinced my professional life was over," Grace added. "And you gave me opportunities that transformed everything, not just for me, but for David and Lily and Luke too." "We saved each other," Adrian said. "You saved me from bankruptcy. I helped save you from circumstances that were wasting your potential, and somewhere in that process, we fell in love." "Best mistake I almost made," Grace said with a slight smile. "Nearly signing those papers. Best decision I ever made was hiring you," Adrian countered, "even though I initially only saw you as a maid rather than recognizing your capabilities." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both reflecting on the extraordinary journey from that terrible morning when Adrian had been defeated and Grace had been just the invisible domestic help, and to this moment where they'd built both professional partnership and romantic relationship on foundations of mutual respect, trust, and genuine love. 2 years after saving Adrian's company, Grace completed her paralegal certification with honors. Adrian threw a celebration dinner for her, inviting not just her siblings and aunt, but also colleagues from Caldwell Enterprises who'd come to value Grace's contributions to the company's recovery and ongoing success. "Grace started working for me as a maid," Adrian said in his toast, to some surprise from guests who only knew her as his executive assistant. "I'm ashamed to admit I initially saw her as just domestic help, someone to maintain my household while I dealt with my company's collapse. I failed completely to recognize her intelligence, her legal training, her incredible attention to detail." He looked at Grace with obvious affection. "Then one morning, Grace noticed something in my bankruptcy documents that no one else had caught. Not my lawyers, not my accountants, not any of the professionals I was paying significant fees to advise me. She noticed a fraudulent clause that would have cost me everything, and instead of just quietly doing her job, she had the courage to speak up despite our vastly different positions. That act of courage saved my company," Adrian continued, "but it also began a relationship that saved me personally. Grace has become not just my invaluable assistant, but my partner in business and in life. Her paralegal certification is just the latest example of her commitment to excellence and her refusal to let circumstances limit her potential." He raised his glass. "To Grace, the woman who saw what others missed, who had courage to speak truth to power, who's built an extraordinary career while supporting her family with grace and determination. You inspire me every day." After the celebration, as Adrian drove Grace home, she said, "Thank you for that speech, for acknowledging where I started and how far I've come. Some people in my position would want to hide their humble beginnings. So, why hide the truth?" Adrian asked. "You were a maid because life circumstances forced you into that work, not because it defined your capabilities. The fact that you went from domestic work to executive assistant while completing a paralegal certification makes your success more impressive, not less. Grace, you should be proud of overcoming obstacles rather than hiding them." "I am proud," Grace said, "but I also know some people will always see me as the maid who married up rather than recognizing my actual professional contributions. Let them think whatever they want," Adrian said. The people who matter are colleagues, your siblings, people who actually know us, they understand. Our relationship is built on mutual respect and equal partnership. Anyone who reduces you to a gold digger or reduces me to a white knight rescuing you doesn't understand either of us. 3 years after Grace had saved Adrian's company, Caldwell Enterprises had not only recovered, but was thriving beyond its pre-collapse status. Adrian had learned from the betrayal, implementing transparent systems and building a corporate culture that valued integrity and accountability. The company had won several awards for ethical business practices and workplace culture, recognition Adrian credited largely to Grace's influence. On the anniversary of that terrible morning, when Adrian had almost signed the fraudulent bankruptcy papers, Adrian took Grace back to his penthouse, the same dining room where she'd noticed the suspicious clause that saved everything. 3 years ago, I sat at this table defeated and alone, Adrian said. I thought my life was over. Then you walked in with breakfast and ended up saving my entire empire by noticing something everyone else had missed. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Grace, these past 3 years have been the best of my life, not because my company recovered or my wealth was restored, but because I found you. Because I learned to see people clearly rather than dismissing them based on their job titles. Because I discovered that the most valuable assets aren't financial, they're human. Adrian opened the box, revealing a ring. Grace Martinez, you saved my company, transformed my business, taught me what actually matters, and somehow loved me despite all my flaws and blind spots. Will you marry me? Grace looked at the ring, then at Adrian, tears forming in her eyes. Yes, absolutely yes. As Adrian slid the ring onto her finger, Grace thought about the extraordinary journey from invisible maid to valued partner, from woman working multiple jobs to support her siblings to professional with real career prospects, from seeing herself as just service worker to understanding her own worth. And Adrian thought about the lesson he'd learned the hardest way possible, that the people you overlook, dismiss, or take for granted are often the ones who save you. That character and integrity matter more than credentials and pedigree. That a maid who noticed what lawyers missed wasn't just providing service. She was demonstrating the kind of attention to detail and courage that separated the truly valuable from the merely credentialed. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that reflected both their journeys, elegant but not ostentatious, combining Adrian's business connections with Grace's family and former colleagues from her legal assistant days. David walked Grace down the aisle, proud of his sister who'd sacrificed so much to raise him and his siblings, and who'd finally found love and recognition she deserved. In his vows, Adrian said, Grace, you saw the truth when I was too defeated to see it myself. You had courage to speak up when staying silent would have been safer. You saved my company, but more importantly, you saved me from becoming permanently cynical and isolated. I promise to always see you clearly, to value your perspective, to build a partnership based on mutual respect rather than gratitude or obligation. I love you not for what you did for me, but for who you are, the strongest, most perceptive, most genuine person I've ever known. In her vows, Grace said, Adrian, you could have just given me money as thanks for catching that fraudulent clause. Instead, you gave me opportunities, invested in my education, recognized my potential when I'd stopped seeing it myself. You transformed my circumstances without making me feel like a charity case. You saw me as equal partner rather than rescued maid. I promise to always tell you truth even when it's uncomfortable, to use the opportunities you've provided to build something meaningful, to love you for who you are rather than what you have. You reminded me that kindness and success aren't mutually exclusive, that wealth can be used for good, that the powerful can choose to see and value the overlooked. 5 years after Grace had saved Adrian from signing fraudulent bankruptcy papers, they stood together in the newly opened Hale Martinez Community Center, a facility they'd founded together to provide legal assistance, job training, and educational support to people in circumstances similar to where Grace had been. Capable people trapped in service work because life circumstances prevented them from accessing professional opportunities. This center represents everything we believe in, Grace said at the opening ceremony. that everyone deserves chances to develop their potential regardless of their current circumstances, that the work people do to survive doesn't define their capabilities, that sometimes all someone needs is someone else willing to see their worth and invest in their success. Adrian added, 5 years ago, I almost lost everything because I'd stopped paying attention to details, had stopped seeing people clearly, had become isolated in my wealth. Grace saved me by being someone who saw what others missed, both the fraudulent clause in my documents and the potential for who I could become if I learned the right lessons from betrayal and near ruin. The community center would serve thousands in the years to come, people working service jobs while holding advanced degrees, immigrants with professional credentials from their home countries working as janitors or maids in America, single parents who'd put careers on hold to raise children. The center provided legal guidance, connected people with job opportunities matching their skills, offered continuing education and certification programs. But what made the center most effective was that it was run by people who'd lived these experiences. Grace hired staff who'd worked service jobs despite professional training, who understood the barriers preventing people from accessing their potential, who could see capabilities others missed because they'd been overlooked themselves. 10 years after Grace had noticed the fraudulent bankruptcy clause, she and Adrian had built an empire together, not just Caldwell Enterprises, which had grown significantly under their joint leadership, but a network of community programs, scholarship funds, and advocacy initiatives supporting people trapped in circumstances that didn't reflect their potential. They had 2 children of their own now, in addition to continuing to support Grace's siblings, who'd all gone on to successful careers. David as a lawyer, Lily as a diabetes educator, Luke as a teacher. Their children were being raised to understand that privilege came with responsibility, that seeing people clearly meant looking beyond job titles and social positions, that the most important skill was recognizing value wherever it appeared. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful morning, Adrian and Grace returned to the penthouse dining room one more time. 10 years, Adrian said, a decade since I almost signed away everything to the man who betrayed me. If you hadn't noticed that clause, Grace, my entire life would be completely different. If you hadn't listened when I spoke up, Grace countered, if you hadn't recognized the value of my perspective despite my low-status position, if you hadn't invested in developing my potential, my life would be completely different too. We transformed each other, Adrian. That's what partnership means. They stood together looking out the window at the city where both their lives had changed so dramatically. 2 people from vastly different circumstances who'd found each other in the most unlikely moment, her as his maid, him at his lowest point, and had built something extraordinary together. A maid had saved a billionaire by noticing what everyone else missed. A billionaire had saved a maid by seeing her potential when she'd stopped seeing it herself. And together they'd proved that the most valuable assets weren't financial, they were human. The ability to see clearly, to value competence wherever it appeared, to build partnerships on mutual respect rather than gratitude or obligation. Sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes the people you dismissed as unimportant turned out to be exactly who you needed. And sometimes, nearly losing everything taught you what actually mattered, not the empire itself, but the character and integrity and human connections that made that empire worth building in the first place. 15 years after Grace had noticed the fraudulent clause that saved Adrian's empire, they stood together on stage at the National Business Ethics Conference, sharing their story with thousands of business leaders, entrepreneurs, and executives. The conference had invited them to speak about ethical leadership, transparency in business practices, and the importance of diverse perspectives in corporate decision-making. 15 years ago, I was about to sign documents that would have cost me everything, Adrian began, his voice carrying authority earned from years of rebuilding and leading with integrity. Not just my company, but my foundation, my properties, everything I'd built over 20 years. The bankruptcy papers looked legitimate. My lawyers had prepared them. I had no reason to suspect fraud. He paused, looking at Grace, who stood beside him. Then my maid, a woman I'd barely noticed during the 6 months she'd worked for me, pointed out a clause buried in the legal language. a transfer clause that would have signed my entire estate over to the man who'd betrayed me. Grace saved me because she had legal training I didn't know about, because she paid attention when everyone else assumed the documents were fine, and because she had the courage to speak up, despite our vastly different positions. Grace took over the narrative. I was terrified pointing out that clause. Adrian was my employer. I was just the maid. Questioning legal documents his attorneys had prepared felt presumptuous and risky, but I'd worked as a legal assistant before family tragedy forced me into domestic work, and I recognized transfer language versus bankruptcy language. I couldn't stay silent knowing he was about to make a catastrophic mistake. Grace's courage that morning didn't just save my company, Adrian continued. It revealed the importance of having diverse perspectives at every level of business. My highly credentialed lawyers, people I'd paid premium fees for years, either missed or deliberately included fraudulent clauses. But Grace, working as a maid because circumstances had forced her out of her legal career, caught what they missed or hid. Dumaine. The audience was rivalry attentive as Adrian and Grace shared the full story. Mark Vance's systematic embezzlement, the conspiracy with Adrian's legal team, the near-total collapse of Caldwell Enterprises, and the investigation that ultimately recovered millions and sent the conspirators to prison. What we learned from this experience, Grace said, is that valuable insights can come from anyone, regardless of their position or title. Organizations that only listen to highly credentialed voices miss perspectives that could save them from disaster or reveal opportunities others don't see. The janitor might notice security vulnerabilities. The receptionist might hear customer complaints that never reach management. The assistant might catch financial irregularities. Since rebuilding Caldwell Enterprises, Adrian added, we've implemented systems ensuring all employees can report concerns directly to leadership without going through layers of hierarchy. We've created diverse advisory boards including people from all levels of the company, not just executives. We've established anonymous reporting mechanisms with genuine protections against retaliation, and Grace, who saved my company by speaking up as a maid, now serves as our Chief Operating Officer, overseeing operations across all divisions. If you've ever witnessed something wrong but were afraid to speak up, if you've ever had valuable insights dismissed because of your position, drop a comment and subscribe. This story reminds us that wisdom and courage exist at every level of any organization, that the people we overlook often see what those in power miss, and that building cultures where everyone feels empowered to share concerns can prevent disasters before they happen. After their keynote, dozens of audience members approached with their own stories of discovering fraud, preventing disasters, or having valuable insights initially dismissed because of their junior positions. One woman, a facilities manager, shared how she'd identified a security vulnerability that could have cost her company millions, but had struggled to get executives to take her concerns seriously until a breach actually occurred. Your story gives me hope, the woman told Grace. That speaking up matters even when people initially dismiss you. That persistence and courage eventually get recognized. Keep speaking up, Grace encouraged her. Document what you observe, present your concerns clearly, and find allies who'll help amplify your voice. The right leaders will eventually listen, and if your current leaders won't, better organizations exist that will value your perspective. That evening, Adrian and Grace had dinner with several conference attendees who wanted to discuss implementing similar transparency and diverse perspective policies in their own companies. The conversation ranged from practical implementation challenges to deeper philosophical questions about power, privilege, and how organizations could genuinely empower all employees to contribute meaningfully. The hardest part, one CEO admitted, is genuinely being willing to hear uncomfortable truths from people below you in the hierarchy. It's easy to say you want honest feedback. It's harder to actually receive it graciously and act on it, especially when it reveals your own mistakes or blind spots. Quote, "That's why systems matter more than good intentions," Adrian said. "I thought I was approachable before my company's collapse, but I'd created an environment where my maid didn't feel comfortable telling me she had legal skills or offering perspectives on business matters. The systemic message was clear, even if my personal intention was openness. Stick to your role. Don't overstep. Don't offer opinions beyond your job description. How did you change that culture? Another executive asked. We started by acknowledging it existed, Grace answered. We conducted anonymous surveys asking employees at all levels what prevented them from sharing concerns or ideas. The responses were eye-opening. People were afraid of retaliation and worried about being labeled difficult, convinced leadership wouldn't listen anyway, or just didn't think their perspective mattered given their position. Then we implemented concrete changes, Adrian continued. Regular town halls where anyone can ask questions directly to leadership. Anonymous reporting systems with third-party administration so employees don't fear internal retaliation. Explicit policies protecting people who raise concerns, with real consequences for managers who retaliate. And most importantly, visible examples of employees at all levels having their insights taken seriously and acted upon. 20 years after Grace had saved Adrian's company, Caldwell Enterprises was not just thriving financially, but had become recognized as a model for ethical business practices, workplace culture, and effective corporate governance. The company had won numerous awards, had been featured in business school case studies, and had inspired other organizations to implement similar transparency and diverse perspective policies. But what gave Adrian and Grace the most satisfaction wasn't the recognition or financial success. It was the culture they'd built, one where a current janitor could identify potential fraud and have leadership, take the concerns seriously, where assistants contributed to strategic decisions alongside executives, where value was measured by insight quality rather than position title. On the 20th anniversary of the morning Grace had saved Adrian from signing fraudulent bankruptcy papers, they held a company-wide celebration at Caldwell Tower. Employees from all divisions and all levels gathered to celebrate not just the company's success, but the culture that made that success sustainable and meaningful. 20 years ago today, I sat at my dining table about to sign away everything, Adrian told the assembled employees. I was defeated, isolated, convinced my empire was lost. Then Grace, working as my maid, noticed something no one else had caught, and had the courage to speak up despite our vastly different positions. He looked around the room at faces representing every level and function of the company. What Grace taught me that morning was that valuable perspectives exist everywhere, that the person cleaning your office might have insights that could save your company, that dismissing people based on their job title rather than their capabilities is not just ethically wrong, it's strategically foolish. Since that morning, we've built Caldwell Enterprises on the principle that everyone has valuable perspective to contribute, Adrian continued. We've created systems ensuring those perspectives are heard, considered, and acted upon regardless of who voices them. And that approach, valuing humans for their insights rather than their credentials, is why we've not only survived, but thrived. Grace spoke next, sharing her perspective on the journey from maid to COO. 20 years ago, I was working domestic jobs because family tragedy had forced me out of my legal career. I felt invisible, overlooked, like my professional skills and training didn't matter anymore. Then I noticed something wrong in Adrian's bankruptcy documents, and instead of dismissing my concern, he listened. He investigated. He valued my perspective despite my low-status position. That experience taught me that being genuinely seen for your capabilities rather than judged by your circumstances, can transform everything, Grace continued. Adrian saw my potential when I'd stopped seeing it myself. He created opportunities for me to rebuild my career, finish my education, contribute meaningfully to this company's success. And together, we've worked to ensure every employee at Caldwell Enterprises feels similarly seen and valued. After the celebration, as employees mingled and shared stories, a young woman approached Grace nervously. "Miss Hale, I wanted to thank you. I started here 2 years ago as an administrative assistant. Last month, I noticed what I thought might be a security vulnerability in our new software system. I was terrified to report it. I'm not in IT. I'm just an assistant. Who was I to question the system our tech team had implemented? But I remembered your story. the woman continued. How you spoke up even though you were just the maid. So I reported my concern through the anonymous system. It investigated and discovered I was right. There was a vulnerability that could have been exploited. They fixed it before any breach occurred and credited me in the quarterly security report. Miss Hale, your story gave me the courage to trust my instincts and speak up. Thank you. Grace hugged the woman. You did the right thing. That vulnerability could have cost this company significantly if left unaddressed. Your willingness to report it despite feeling unqualified probably prevented a disaster. That's exactly the kind of courage we need from everyone at every level. After the woman left, Adrian said quietly, "That's why everything we went through mattered. Not just rebuilding the company or achieving financial success, but creating a culture where that young woman felt empowered to report a concern despite being just an assistant. Grace, you modeled the courage that's now replicating throughout this entire organization." 25 years after Grace had noticed the fraudulent bankruptcy clause, they were preparing for Adrian's retirement from active CEO duties. At 72, Adrian was ready to step back from daily operations. Though he'd remained chairman of the board and active in the Hale Martinez Foundation they'd established to support people in circumstances similar to where Grace had been capable, professionals forced into survival jobs by life circumstances. The transition process had been carefully planned over years, with succession planning that reflected the values Adrian and Grace had built Coldwell Enterprises on. The new CEO would be promoted from within a former call center representative who'd risen through the ranks by consistently demonstrating strategic thinking, ethical leadership, and commitment to the company's culture of valuing diverse perspectives. It feels right passing leadership to someone who started at an entry level, Adrian told Grace as they prepared for the announcement. Someone who understands what it's like to not be taken seriously because of your position, who earned advancement through demonstrated capability rather than credentials or connections. Grace, who would remain as COO for another few years before her own planned retirement, nodded. Jasmine will be excellent. She's brilliant strategically, genuinely cares about employees, and has the courage to make difficult decisions when necessary. Everything we've built will be in good hands. At Adrian's retirement celebration, he gave his final speech as CEO to the company he'd almost lost 25 years earlier. When I started Coldwell Enterprises 37 years ago, I thought success meant building wealth and empire. I measured achievement in revenue and market share. I believed surrounding myself with elite professionals guaranteed good judgment. Then I nearly lost everything because I'd stopped paying attention, had trusted the wrong people, had created an environment where the most valuable insight came from someone I'd dismissed as just the maid. Adrian continued. Grace saved this company, but more than that, she saved me from remaining blind to what actually matters, not credentials or status, but character and integrity and genuine human connection. He looked at Grace, his partner in business and life for 25 years. Together, we rebuilt Coldwell Enterprises on a foundation of transparency, diverse perspectives, and genuine respect for every person, regardless of their position. We created systems ensuring valuable insights don't get lost because of who voices them. We built a culture where speaking truth to power is encouraged rather than punished. As I step back from daily leadership, I'm confident this company will continue thriving, Adrian concluded, not because of any individual leader's brilliance, but because we've built something sustainable, an organization that values humanity, that listens to everyone, that understands wisdom exists at every level. That's the legacy I'm most proud of. Thank you all for being part of building it. Grace spoke next, her voice steady despite the emotion of this transition. 25 years ago, I was Adrian's maid. I was working multiple service jobs to support my siblings after our parents died. My legal skills were being wasted. My professional potential was being overlooked. I felt invisible. Then I noticed something wrong in bankruptcy documents Adrian was about to sign, Grace continued. I was terrified to speak up. He was my employer. I was just domestic help, questioning legal documents. His attorneys prepared felt presumptuous. But I couldn't stay silent, knowing he was about to make a catastrophic mistake. Adrian didn't dismiss my concern, Grace said, looking at her husband with obvious affection. He listened, he investigated, he valued my perspective despite my low-status position. Then he created opportunities for me to rebuild my legal career, to contribute meaningfully to this company, to develop my potential beyond what I'd thought possible after losing my parents. What Adrian gave me wasn't charity, it was opportunity combined with respect, Grace emphasized. He saw capabilities others had overlooked. He invested in developing those capabilities, and he treated me as equal partner rather than rescued subordinate. That approach, seeing people's potential and creating space for them to achieve it, is what makes Caldwell Enterprises special. 30 years after Grace had saved Adrian's company, they sat together in the penthouse, where everything had begun, the same dining room where Adrian had almost signed fraudulent bankruptcy papers, where Grace had noticed the suspicious clause that saved everything. 30 years, Adrian said, shaking his head. 3 decades since I almost lost everything. Grace, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't noticed that clause? Or if you'd noticed but been too afraid to speak up? All the time, Grace admitted. Mark Vance would have stolen your entire estate. You'd have lost your company, your foundation, your home. I'd still be working multiple service jobs. Our paths would never have intersected meaningfully. None of what we've built together would exist. The community center helping thousands of people wouldn't exist, Adrian added. The scholarship program supporting students from circumstances like yours wouldn't exist. The ethical business model we've developed and shared wouldn't exist. So much good came from your courage that morning. And from your willingness to listen, Grace countered. Lots of wealthy people would have dismissed concerns from their maid, regardless of how valid those concerns were. You listened. You investigated. You valued my perspective enough to act on it. That openness to hearing truth from unexpected sources is what made everything else possible. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both reflecting on the extraordinary journey from that terrible morning when Adrian had been defeated and Grace had been invisible, to this moment, 30 years later, where they'd built an empire together based on mutual respect, diverse perspectives, and genuine human connection. You know what I think about most? Adrian asked. Not the financial success or the company's growth or the awards and recognition. I think about how close I came to missing you entirely, to never knowing you, never building this partnership, never learning the lessons you taught me about what actually matters. What do you think matters most? Grace asked, though she knew the answer. Seeing people clearly, Adrian said. Not judging them by credentials or status, but recognizing their actual capabilities. Creating environments where everyone feels empowered to contribute their perspectives. Building organizations on foundations of transparency and respect, rather than hierarchy and fear. And most importantly, understanding that the people you initially overlook might be exactly who you need, if you're humble enough to see them and wise enough to listen. That's what I tell young professionals when they ask for career advice, Grace said. Don't let your current circumstances convince you that you have nothing valuable to offer. Trust your expertise and instincts even when others dismiss you because of your position. Have courage to speak up when you see something wrong, even if you're afraid. And look for leaders who value insight over credentials, who create cultures where everyone's perspective matters. And what do you tell leaders? Adrian asked. I tell them to pay attention to everyone at every level of their organizations, Grace answered. That the most valuable insight preventing their next disaster might come from someone they're currently overlooking. That building genuine cultures of transparency and respect isn't just ethically right, it's strategically essential. That surrounding yourself only with elite professionals creates dangerous blind spots. I tell them about us, Grace continued, about the billionaire who almost lost everything, and the maid who saved him by noticing what highly paid attorneys either missed or hid. About how that terrible morning transformed into partnership that's lasted 3 decades and helped thousands of people. About how nearly losing everything taught you what actually mattered, not wealth or status, but character and connection and genuine respect for human potential wherever it appears. As the sun set over the city where both their lives had changed so dramatically 30 years earlier, Adrian and Grace stood together at the window, looking out at the skyline they'd helped shape through their business and philanthropic work. "The Maid and the Billionaire," Adrian said with slight amusement. "That's how people still describe us even though you've been a high-level executive for decades." "It's actually a good summary," Grace said, "because it reminds people that status and circumstances don't determine worth. That extraordinary insights can come from anyone regardless of their position. That the people society dismisses as unimportant might be exactly who you need if you're willing to see them." "You saved my empire by being someone I'd overlooked," Adrian said. "Then you saved me personally by showing me what actually mattered beyond financial success. Grace, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. But hiring you as my maid and being wise enough to listen when you spoke up, that was the second best decision. Everything good in the past 30 years flows from those choices. And my best decision was having the courage to speak up that morning," Grace said. "Even though I was terrified, even though you were my employer and I was just the maid, even though questioning your attorney's work felt presumptuous, I trusted my expertise and had courage to voice my concerns despite our vastly different positions. That courage changed both our lives," Adrian agreed, "and through us, changed thousands of others' lives through the programs we've built and the culture we've established." They stood in comfortable silence, both understanding that their story, the billionaire and the maid, the man who almost lost everything and the woman who saved him by noticing what others missed, would outlive them both. It would be told in business schools teaching ethical leadership, in diversity and inclusion trainings emphasizing the value of diverse perspectives, in orientation sessions for new employees learning that everyone's voice matters regardless of their position. But the most important legacy wasn't the story itself. It was the lived reality they'd created, organizations that genuinely valued all employees, systems that empowered people to speak truth to power without fear, cultures that understood wisdom existed at every level. A maid had saved a billionaire by noticing fraudulent bankruptcy clauses buried in legal documents. A billionaire had saved a maid by seeing her potential when she'd stopped seeing it herself. And together they'd proved that the most valuable assets weren't financial, they were human. The courage to speak up when something's wrong. The wisdom to listen regardless of who's speaking. The humility to admit you've been overlooking valuable perspectives. The commitment to building organizations on foundations of respect rather than hierarchy. Sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes the people dismissed as unimportant turned out to be exactly who you needed. And sometimes nearly losing everything taught you what actually mattered, not the empire itself, but the character, integrity, and human connections that made that empire worth building and sustaining. 30 years after Grace had noticed one suspicious clause in bankruptcy documents, the ripple effects of that single act of courage continued spreading through the thousands of people their foundation had helped, through the organizational culture they'd established at Caldwell Enterprises, through the young professionals inspired by their story to trust their own expertise and speak up despite fear, through the leaders learning to value diverse perspectives over elite credentials. A moment of courage, a willingness to listen, a partnership built on mutual respect. These simple elements had transformed 2 lives and countless others, proving that sometimes the most profound changes begin with someone overlooked finally being seen, someone powerless finding courage to speak, and someone powerful being humble enough to listen. That was their legacy, and it would endure long after they were gone, continuing to inspire people to see clearly, speak courageously, and build organizations that valued humanity over hierarchy. Because the story of the billionaire and the maid wasn't just about them, it was about the transformative power of recognition, respect, and the radical act of treating everyone's perspective as potentially valuable, regardless of their position.